Hello, good night. Welcome to Legalize this 22nd day of June 2025. Tonight, we will have with us, but he's in a few minutes' time, Dr. Didacus Jules, the Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Unfortunately, the co-host, my usual co-host, is not available tonight, so I have with me my brother, my friend and brother, Jobo Samuel Thomas, who will assist me in this program. In particular, given that I'm still somewhat below the weather. So, welcome, brother Jobo.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's always my pleasure to be on.
Yes,
It's a signal honor. Anytime you call me, I am ready to go.
I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
So, Dr. Jules will be with us in a few minutes' time, but
You're great.
before he comes on, we can just, I guess, chit chat about uh, events of relevance or importance. And I think the most important one now is what is happening in the world in terms of
Oh
development.
God, the
In the
dangerous
last
times.
8 days and in particular in the last 24 hours or so.
Yes, dangerous times.
Yes, and it does have
The
implications for the OECS as a sub-region, in part even of a bigger region called CARICOM. So I guess Dr. Jules, we will probably just engage him. I know what
yeah,
is very diplomatic and sensitive
yeah.
in terms of responses, in this period. But I think Jomo, to mark the 44th anniversary of the OECS, the Parliament, the OECS
The
Parliament,
assembly met in St. Vincent.
the Assembly making sentence. And the
Yes,
Assembly is comprised of who? We'll ask Dr. Jules all that, but generally speaking,
comprise both the government side and the opposition.
in all of the islands.
Yeah, in all of the nine island countries and territories.
Okay. Were you able to attend that meeting at all?
No. This week was a kind of hectic week for me, so I didn't get a chance to attend. In fact, I rarely get to attend the parliament these days because it's no longer in Kingstown where I could simply walk across the street from my office. The building, the Central Courthouse building, which is close to 200 years old, has been allowed to go into a state of disrepair. So the government moved out of that building. It's abandoned. It's sitting there. It's really sad. And they built a structure out at Caliquo, and that's where the parliament has been sitting and meeting for the last 3 years, I think. The government says that it also plans to build a hall of justice. This has been in the works now for many years. And when the hall of justice is completed, the plan, according to the government, is to use this current uh, assembly hall as a hostel for students who are coming up from the Grenadines and maybe going to community colleges because it's pretty close to the community college.
Okay.
So I don't get to go as often as I used to go. Each time when the parliament met in Kingston, I tried to go for a few hours at least one day. But in fact, I have only gone to that parliament once since it opened, and that was for a short period in the last budget session. But I listened and I read some of the things that were being said.
That's at the
Um,
OECS Parliament meeting.
yes, yes,
Okay, so it was widely covered in St. Vincent.
it was covered. Yeah, it got coverage. The government information, government radio carried it. So, and then the electronic media. carry it, and the weekend papers had some things as well. The Eyewitness News had fairly um, extensive coverage of some of the things that were said there. There are a number of bills that came up for discussion. One of the things that took center stage in these discussions was what different positions on CBI, Citizenship by Investment, that program. And then towards the end, the incoming chairman of the OECS, PM Gonzalez, laid out a list of things that he wanted to see. One of the things that was mentioned, and it's important in the context of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is he says that he thinks the time has come for the OECS countries to withdraw from CSME because
to withdraw from CSME.
Yeah, because these smaller islands are getting the short end of the stick from the bigger, more powerful, larger economies. In fact, over the last few days, he went really hard at Kamala Prasad, Trinidad, and Kamala Besessa is current Prime Minister of Trinidad, and he was complaining about the fact that people are trading different, and mentioning particularly St. Vincent, that we're trading with Trinidad, but find it very difficult to get foreign exchange out of Trinidad. So what happens is that you go there to trade and you end up having to, many of our traffickers, many of our traders end up spending the money there because they have to buy things to bring it back here. So they buy a lot of drinks and things like that and sell it. So they can't get to bring the money out. So he was complaining about that. So that was an issue. The CBI question was an issue. Opposition leader Chastenay, Alan Chastenay, was quite forceful.
That's St. Lucia?
Yes, St. Lucia opposition leader, quite forceful, making the point that, yeah, some of the issue, he did not think that the CBI program was bad in and of itself. He thought it's the operation of it that was problematic. And many of the bureaucrats and so on who were running some of these programs may well be accused of bringing it into disrepute in one territory or the other. But he thought, and in fact, what he did suggest was that the entire OECS should come together as one, have one commission, CBI commission, where they market the region as a place for citizenship by investment, that all of the money go into one pool, something like a legacy fund, and then the leaders can decide how they did it. He made an important point, I thought, and it's a point that I had not thought about until I read it. I read what he said. He made the point that because the OECS is a common market, by the time SINKIT started its CBI program in 1984, all of the countries essentially became part. And he also went on to say that there were about 200,000 new citizens over the last 41 years since SINKIT started, cumulatively of all the islands, 200,000. And he says that he made the point that, look, I spoke to Prime Minister Gonzalez about this. I don't understand your opposition because people are coming in anyway. And once they're coming in St. Lucia or Grenada, and they have a passport from any of these countries, because of the common market in the OECS, they can travel freely within the OECS and don't necessarily need your passport to do what you say you're not going to allow them to do. So that was an interesting point that was made as well.
It is one of the points.
So 200,000 citizens in 40 years. Excuse me?
I was saying it's one of the things we'll discuss with our director general.
Yes, once when he
In
comes
terms
on.
of freedom of movement.
Yeah.
Exactly how that works. If it in fact citizens are just free to move from one OECS island to the next. And I think we have Dr. Jules now. Thank you so much. You hearing us? We're not hearing you.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are.
We hear you now. So I normally my co-host who is Miss Aisha Mclean, she's unavailable tonight. So I asked Jomo to sit in with me in particular because you'll be hearing from my voice. I'm a bit below the weather, So we actually started the discussion, and it's a very good entry point because, as I indicated to you, several persons sent questions and comments, and I know there will be other people who have other matters that they want to raise. So Joe will do most of the engaging, but I will just start off. If you can just give us a brief. We know the OECS celebrated 44 years on 18 June. So if you can just give the viewers and the listeners and those who will follow the program, just a background to the OECS formation, what was the background, how it came about, and what it is all about. I know it's a bit, but if you
Okay.
may.
Yes, thanks very much for the opportunity. Let me say that, as you indicated, it's this year. This June is the 44th anniversary of the formation of the OECS. On the 18th of June, 1981, seven Eastern Caribbean states launched the OECS with the signing of a treaty in Basel and Kitts, that the intention of which was to establish a regional integration movement. In 2010, June 2010, the revised Treaty of Basel was signed, which deepened the ambition. And what that sought to do was to extend the effort at regional integration to a much wider remit. The revised Treaty of Basel is a very comprehensive document that speaks to the core objectives, essentially to establish deeper economic, political, and social union among the member states of the OECS. And it provides for full and associate membership. The full membership obviously would be those countries that are independent and sovereign states and therefore have a capacity to make all decisions pertaining to their integration. And the associate members include the non-independent territories, so like the British overseas territories, the French overseas territories. Essentially, the idea of incorporating associate members, it was felt that one needed to be not divided by politics, but united by geography. So if you look at the chain of islands that constitute the Eastern Caribbean, you will know that in the middle of this are British overseas territories and also French territories, like Martinique and Guadeloupe are actually midway in the chain of the Eastern Caribbean islands. And they had also expressed over time increasing interest in becoming members of that organization. So the treaty allows for that category of membership. And the purposes of the organization have to do with promoting cooperation at regional and international levels, maintaining unity and solidarity among member states, defending our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, and the independence of member states, achieving to the fullest extent possible the harmonization of foreign policy, and importantly, establishing the OECS Economic Union as a single economic and financial space, or one might add also as a social space. So that really is the context. And so the remit in terms of the subject matter that we deal with at the OECS is very wide. There are issues of mutual defense and security, judicial and legal affairs, and that is enshrined also in the formation of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, overseas representation and external relations. We have a couple missions that are joint missions of all of the member states, for example, in Brussels and in Geneva. In education, culture, science, environment especially, given also the onslaught of climate change since the formation of the OECS 44 years ago, climate has become a huge issue on our agenda. And it is not an issue from the perspective of hypothesizing or arguing about climate change. It is really a programmatic approach to doing that green transition for the OECS. So right now, for example, many of the member states have already done serious work on geothermal. Dominica is about to commission its geothermal plant. St. Kitts and Nevis is about to do the same. St. Lucia is talking about it. So there are decisive measures being taken to make that paradigm shift to green energy, which would be a huge economic boost for us as well, because once the cost of energy starts to go down dramatically, it opens up all kinds of economic and social possibilities. Then environmental sustainability, marine resources, and education. I think education has been one of the outstanding areas of accomplishment for the OECS in terms of the harmonization of curricula from preschool to primary level. To some extent, the tertiary institutions, the community colleges of the OECS have been coming closer and closer together in their articulation arrangements. And telecommunications, transport, civil aviation continue to be a challenge, frankly, but these are areas in which we are trying to make decisive progress. And on the economic front, moving to establish that single market and economy.
Well, that's a tall order. How would you, after all of these years, celebrating 44 years now, would you say that, how would you rate what has been accomplished over that period?
Well, very frankly, Jomo, I would say that we should have accomplished much more. But what is encouraging is the fact that I think increasingly we are realizing that internationally, the OECS is seen as one of the tightest and most productive integration movements globally. A lot of people don't know some of the facts of this. So, for example, the formation of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank was actually represented the first regional central bank established anywhere in the world. So the EC dollar is a precursor to the euro. And in fact, when the EU was looking at setting up their financial arrangements, they actually came and looked at the experience of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which, as you know, was headed by the legendary Sir Dwight Venner for many years. So in many ways, people recognize that, and we've been trying to break new ground with what we're doing, because in the times that we live in now, with all of the geopolitical uncertainty, the climatic catastrophe, it is very clear to us that there is only one way forward, and that is to deepen and accelerate that economic union. As small states, we are too disadvantaged in a global environment that is unsympathetic, uncaring. The arteries of human conscience have narrowed considerably. People are talking about their countries first, and just self-seeking approaches in the geopolitical arena. So we really, if we don't look out for each other and ourselves, no one is going to do that for us.
Okay.
Just remind us, which countries are we speaking of as OECS members?
Okay, so we now have a full membership of 12 member states. Of the 12 member states, 6 are independent member states, 6 are non-independent states. So the independent members are Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, and the Saints, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Mhm.
And then we have 3 British overseas territories: Anguilla, BVI, and Montserrat, although Montserrat actually is a full member because they were one of the early signers to the Treaty of Bastet, and they got a special provision from the British to become a full member. So it's a strange arrangement, but at least it works for them because they have relative autonomy more than the other British overseas territories. And then we have 3 French member states. Martinique first joined, followed by Guadeloupe, and just late last year, we had Saint Martin on the French side joining. Since then, we've had serious expressions of interest from several other small states in the Eastern Caribbean to become members. So Saint Martin on the Dutch side has been aggressively um, seeking to become members of the OECS. We have frankly said to them, let's just take some time to reflect on this, because any change of the balance, right now we are balanced equally between full members and associate members. Any change to a majority of associate members, I think we have to study carefully what are the implications of that for the relative autonomy of the OECS as an integration movement and the political space that we have to maneuver. So that would be a challenge. We are, however, committed to deepening functional relations with all countries in the Eastern Caribbean. And as you know, because we are also members of CARICOM, we play an active role in CARICOM as well.
Um, in response to my question, you said that we should have accomplished much more. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that you would have liked to see us accomplish, which we have not yet done?
Okay, some of it is simple stuff, but it has deep implications going down the road. So, for example, in the area of the economic union and the free movement of people, we do have free movement of nationals because all of any national of an OECS member state can travel, and member state are not necessarily associate. It may go for, it would go for the full member states as well as the British overseas territories can travel freely across the OECS. So, for example, Jomo, if you leave St. Vincent and you come to St. Lucia tomorrow, or you go to Grenada or Antigua, technically you should not even be required to produce a passport. Once you produce a government picture issued ID, a government issued picture ID, that should be sufficient to allow you to stay, to go for short visitation or for however long you want to stay. There should be no restrictions in terms of how much money you have to come in, how long you're going to stay, and all of that. I mean, these questions may be asked because it's a right of immigration to find out, but there should be no impediment to that free movement. Now, one of the challenges there is that we find increasingly that despite many training sessions, immigration and other officials in border states, in the border accept a driver's license or an NIS ID card. I need to see your passport. And technically, they're not supposed to ask for. Speak to is the fact that these are things that should have been long behind us. We just this last week when we met in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for the first time the Eastern Caribbean Assembly
I think we're losing you a bit, Didacus.
Yeah. Seems as though the internet connection is bad. A while ago, I lost both of you for about a minute.
Oh, you lost me too, also. Yeah, we're losing there.
Maybe you should send him a WhatsApp message and tell him to go out and come back.
We lost you for a while. Yeah, okay, good. Lord, what can I do? What time? Yeah, okay. What's your experience, Jobo, traveling to the BVI?
I've never, I've never been to the BVI.
We have never been there. I told you what I was
No.
saying. Yes, you are back.
Can you hear me?
You hearing you?
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes, we're hearing you
So
now.
where was I? What was
You
the
spoke about despite the training with customs and immigration,
Yes,
they would still ask you for your passport, even though strictly speaking, NIS card, any government issued ID is supposed to suffice.
yes. So yeah, and I said that we had in the assembly that was held in St. Kitts and in St.
St.
Vincent and the
Vincent.
Grenadines. We had about a suite of 6 bills that had to do with phytosanitary, animal health, um, the free movement of people, contingent rights for spouses and family members, and so on. These were brought to the Assembly for discussion and sensitization. And these bills are now going to be sent on to the parliaments of the OECS member states for passage. So once these are passed, then we would have moved significantly closer to having that full economic union and certainly closing the circle on the free movement of people. And that for us is really important. Now, for me, after 44 years, all of these things should have been in place for some time now. But, with changes of governments and there are challenges too, because sometimes to create that new seamless environment, there's a lot of bureaucratic hurdles that have to be overcome. Harmonization of legislation, the reconciliation of government accounts. For example, the vision for a full economic union is that if I register a business here in St. Lucia, that business being registered in St. Lucia should automatically be registered all across the full member states of the OECS. And it means, therefore, that if I import, let us say I import bicycles into my main operation in St. Lucia, and I have subsidiary outlets in Grenada and St. Vincent, then sending some of that stock to Grenada and St. Vincent should not incur fresh border taxes, because I would have already paid taxation on the full load that I've imported. So working out these arrangements in terms of how the governments would revenue share when stock comes into one headquarters location and then being distributed to other parts of the economic union is a challenge. And as you can appreciate, given the economic nature of our times, our governments are under extreme financial pressure. So it's not for lack of interest, it's simply working out the logistics. And also, with the technological revolution happening now, it really is about finding the right software to be able to do this in as seamless and as efficient a way as possible. Now, the good news about that is that we have been recently working on a very revolutionary thing in education. It's called a digital learning ecosystem that involves the use of AI. But the really fantastic thing about it is that this entire architecture and the AI engine driving that has been developed by young people from all member states of the OECS. Can you imagine that? So it's not like using Chat GPT, because if you use Chat GPT, it will go all over the world and answer questions based on what it finds, some of which may be contradictory. Our system is a closed system, so the chatbot belongs to us. It is trained on material that is relevant to the OECS, developed by teachers of the OECS, educators, student material. All of that is designed, comes from within the OECS. So it's what we call a single source of truth. It can only give you accurate answers. But more importantly, it's not just about doing administrative stuff, but also to lessen the burden on teachers, for example, in lesson planning, and be able now to develop fit for purpose plans. And contrary to what people may think when they hear about a digital learning ecosystem, they think that we're going to have students glued to screens in the classrooms. No, on the contrary, what this thing does is take a multifaceted approach to learning. So it will suggest activities, physical activities, sporting activities, games, puzzles, things that will cater for the variety of styles of learning. And students with disability, for example, would not be disadvantaged in that. Because when a teacher gives a test based on the lesson plan that they've taught, that test under the being interpolated by the AI is not going to just give a grade. It will give a grade, which is what the teacher would do if they had physically marked the paper. But more importantly, it would indicate for each student what are the gaps in the mastery of the material that was taught. And on that basis, one can then do an individualized plan to help that student master the material. So, I mean, it's something to really look forward to. And what is really exciting is the fact that this was done in-house by young techies across the OECS. Out of curiosity, and I said that in my remarks at the opening of the authority in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I was curious as to how much money is being spent by our governments on a wide range of different software. Some people have ebooks, some have education management information systems, some have curriculum, online curriculum, and so on. And they buy it from different sources. Do you know the total cost of licensing of that software used across in the Anglophone OECS in the last 5 years has been 150 million US dollars. 150 million US dollars. Now that is an expenditure that for us and to our governments was virtually invisible because, you know, a ministry would pay a 50,000 US to buy something and then another 20,000 and so on. But aggregating that over a 5-year period really opened our eyes that we have to be the authors of our own intellectual destiny. And the fact that our young people could do this speaks a lot about the potential of this union for not just learning, but for economic activity, for riding the crest of the technological revolution, for being small, but in charge of ourselves.
But do you have the commitment? Is there a commitment among the OECS countries to do what you were saying, though? Because I thought
there's a deep commitment for it. I can tell you that because the heads were astounded to learn to discover the amount of money we're spending on licensing, and more importantly, the fact that our young people can do it. I think has incited a degree of enthusiasm about the potential of our youth in the OECS that our governments are squarely behind and in support of.
The reason why I asked that is because the St. Lucian opposition leader, Mr. Chastanet, in his presentation, seemed to indicate that yes, at a formal legislative level, there's agreement, but that agreement don't seem to be realized, don't seem to have the practical manifestation of what they're talking about are not happening.
Well, I don't know. Mr. Chastain may have had certain specific instances in mind, points of disagreement. I mean, I think it's widely known, for example, that St. Vincent and the Grenadines has a different perspective on the CIP than the other independent member states. But what is important, I mean, in every political environment, you would have differences of opinion, even among friends. What is critical is, are we united on the key things that are going to help us as a grouping sustain and survive in a very volatile global environment? And I can assure you there is that commitment on the part of our heads. And the successes, as we reap successes from some of these initiatives, I think it encourages governments to commit even deeper.
But were you surprised? Were you surprised by Prime Minister Gonzalez's suggestion that the time may have arrived when the OECS should think about enter into serious consideration about stepping away from the CSME?
Well, I understand exactly where Prime Minister Gonzalez is coming from. In fact, I think all of us share the critique of the CSME, right? Now, as to whether we would want to remove ourselves from the CME, that's a matter for our heads to collectively decide. But I think what is critical, and I mean, Prime Minister Gonzalez, as you know, sometimes speaks in a manner to really get attention to the issue. And he has succeeded in drawing attention to that. We are facing serious disadvantages in how the CSME is being rolled out. And he did give some examples of that. He said, for example, that it is known, for example, that hucksters from Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines in particular go into Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes before the guys are off the docks, all their produce is already sold, right? Now, they are being paid in TT dollars. They cannot come back to St. Vincent or Grenada with TT dollars because no bank is going to do the conversion for them. So they have no choice now but to go into Port of Spain, buy some stuff which they don't really need, which a figure can be sold, and to come back home and sell it. So it's a double responsibility on their part. They're selling produce, but they have to buy something in order to resell to get their income. And it turns what was a small trade advantage actually into a trade disadvantage because they sold to Trinidad and Tobago, and then they had to buy from Trinidad and Tobago in order to receive the fees of their sale. So that's one thing. And there's a very simple solution to that. For years, we've urged the central bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and our ECCB was very welcoming of the idea to hold a bank of the equivalent of, say, 2 million EC dollars, 2 or 3 million US dollars, sorry, in each of them in respective currencies, so that a huckster from Grenada coming back to Grenada from Trinidad could come with her TT dollars, go to a bank and change it into EC. No hassle. Equally, any Trini doing business could get Trini dollars repatriated. And when you juxtapose that with the fact that if you look at the economies, I'm not sure what the recent figures are because I've not had the time to look at the latest statistics. But certainly, even at the height of the oil boom, when oil was the big driver of the Trini economy, the next biggest thing was manufacturing, right? Value-added products. And the biggest market for that was the OECS. So, I'm sure you know about the Caribbean Development Fund, which was a mechanism designed by treaty that was meant to help do an adjustment to help deal with that imbalance. From the time that was working well, the CDF would provide special funding on good concessionary terms to OECS member states in order to manage development initiatives. And it was a very important instrument for redressing some of that trade imbalance. For years now, under Prime Minister Rowley, they indicated that they were no longer, Trinidad was not able to meet its commitment under the CDF, and they were thinking of changing the amount being paid. Now, a treaty does not allow you to just unilaterally change the terms. So that made no sense. So this is the frustration that is driving member states to indicate that, look, if people are not prepared to keep their commitments to us when we are providing more than our share of benefits to them, then we need to take a stand for ourselves. And whether that step is taken will depend on the willingness of the OECS, of the Trinidad and Tobago authorities, to sit at the table with our heads of government to negotiate and discuss how do we have a more equal relationship.
I just want to deal with just for you to address the structure of the OECS, because you mentioned the Parliament, you mentioned the Secretariat, you mentioned the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, you mentioned the authority. I just want you to take us through, because I when you mentioned the Parliament and you mentioned the laws being passed, in the OECS parliament, and then they have to pass in the individual parliaments.
No,
So
no,
I don't
no.
think,
Yeah, well, let me explain it. So first of
yes.
all, there are the OECS is an, as you know, it's a regional integration movement which
Mm,
has several recognized institutions, and under Article 6 of the treaty, the revised Treaty of Basel, these are defined. So you have the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. I mean, you think of
okay.
it, it would be very expensive for each member state to have an independent Supreme Court. So especially as small states. So the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court is the judicial expression of our integration. Then you have the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which has a single unified currency, which is actually one of the strongest currencies in the Caribbean now, and which was the first regional central bank established globally. It's been a point of study by other regional entities looking to set up central banking arrangements. And that has helped preserve the sanctity of the EC dollar. Then you have the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, which handles civil aviation licensing and all matters pertaining to civil aviation at a regional level. And a lot of work is being done in that space now because we're looking at the tradition, taking a fresh look at the traditional arrangements. How do we get restoration of our Category 1 status? um, the question of a lot of this, the revenue from civil aviation, especially for international flights, is being accrued by Trinidad and Tobago, again, because Trinidad's, through an evolution of colonial policy, Trinidad and Tobago has the jurisdiction of flights above a certain flight ceiling. So a lot of the international flights coming in, whatever fees and so on are paid, accrue there. And that is supposed to be shared with the member states that aviation pertains to. But that has been problematic. We've not seen any revenue coming from that. And what they've said they're doing is just helping to upgrade airport equipment here and there. So again, that's part of the argument about why we need to adhere to, in a more religious way to the agreements and the protocols established. Now, so these are the institutions of, and then there's the OECS Commission, which is the secretariat of the integration movement. Now, in terms of the organs of the organization, at the highest level is the OECS Authority, which is a supreme policy making organ. It is constituted by heads of government of the OECS. The treaty speaks to a council of ministers. So we have first of all the Economic Affairs Council, which is the second highest level because this is the council of ministers that looks at all matters pertaining to economic development, and I'm sure you appreciate the importance of that for integration. But the treaty speaks to a council of ministers below that. Now, over the years, we began evolving that council of ministers into separate councils. So we have, for example, a council of ministers of education, of health, of higher. The ministers of education occasionally meet as ministers of higher education. So the focus on these meetings is on tertiary education matters. We have agriculture, we have environment. Environment will also include climate change and so on. We have energy, we have tourism. We just recently, last year, constituted for the first time, was it the time, a ministers of sport. And that was move to do. Because at that ministers of sports meeting, we came up with we designed what we call a sports ecosystem. Because when you talk to people, everybody talks from the perspective of their interest. So, and a sports administrator would say, "Boy, you all have to do something about the administration of sports." The coaches would say, "Coaching is a problem. We need to get good coaches." And somebody else would
We lose you a minute again.
There's a really bad connection over there.
Yes.
the
You drop a minute again.
maybe you should you do a identification for your sponsors and supporters by the time you come back.
Okay, in the meantime, I'd just like to, which I didn't do at the start, recognize the sponsors of the program: Gem Professional Solution Inc., Gem FM carrying this program on FM radio out in Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, G-Town.
I was kind of, well, when Didacus comes back, I was wondering if we needed more, even the less CSME or more CSME
Right. So someone is
to have greater
someone is
integration.
saying that
Can
any
you hear me now?
consideration. Yes, you are back.
Yeah. So what was the last you heard me say?
You were speaking about the sports.
You're talking about the minister talking about sports.
Okay, right. So yes, I was saying so that is sports rather than approach sports in a haphazard way, we wanted to take a ecosystemic approach to sports. So look at all the major components of what will be required to really boost sports in the OECS. So we're looking at a focus on the athletes, but related to that would be the governance of the sporting organizations, the question of coaching, athletes' welfare or sports people's welfare, including insurance for them and that sort of thing, sponsorship of events, the facilities, critical because you notice in many of our member states we have huge stadia that have been built with foreign assistance. But then some of these things there's no plan for maintenance beyond. And of course, for the size and scale of these facilities, they're very costly for our governments to maintain. So again, what we're saying is rather than every country try to replicate Olympic quality standard facilities in each member state, then let's do a distributed presence of certain facilities. So if you have a world-class cricket, two member states, somebody else could have world-class swimming facilities, somebody else will have, world-class golf facilities and so on, right? So in that way, and what has helped too in that with respect to sports is the fact that in the French territories, Guadeloupe has an Olympic high performance training center. So we've been discussing with some of the ferries in the OECS for the next Olympics. Ideally, what we'd like to do is to cut a deal with a ferry to go as far south as Grenada, pick up their Olympians, come up the chain, bring Olympians from the OECS up to Guadeloupe for at least 2-3 months prior to the Olympics for their high performance training. I mean, and this is an amazing facility because it uses computerized testing and everything to optimize the health of the athletes, to balance their training regime and so on. It's all computerized and everything, state of the art. So that's what we're trying to do. So I was saying so that there are these councils of ministers. Now the OECS Assembly is a unique thing. It's not a parliament in the true sense that it has the authority to pass bills of its own. The Assembly is a grouping of parliamentary representatives. So unlike the EU Parliament, where people are elected to the Parliament of the EU, our parliamentarians in the Assembly or our assembly persons in the OECS are persons from the national parliaments in the same proportion that they are constituted in the national parliament. So if it's 3-2 government and opposition or 4-1, then in that proportion they represented in the OECS Assembly. So the OECS Assembly is meant to be a sort of non-partisan national delegation that comes to speak about issues in relation to regional integration and the tighter unification of these islands. So that the idea being, once these things are discussed at the assembly and debated and discussed, then it makes it easier when it comes to the national parliaments for there to be consensus on that. And I'm sure you'd see increasingly over time, certainly in my personal view, the operation of our national parliaments have become more and more fractious. So at least I think this is meant to provide, and that was the wisdom of those who signed the revised Treaty of Bastet, that this provides a sort of non-combative ground where people can freely express their views. And that's why as you saw in the assembly, Prime Minister Gonzalez made this statement about the CSME, and coincidentally, the leader of the opposition of St. Lucia, Mr. Honorable Alan Chasney, expressed similar views. They may have been coming from different spaces in regard to their remarks, but at least it shows the potential for sort of coming together of points of view that could be beneficial to the passage of critical matters relating to regional integration in the national parliaments. And then you have the OECS Commission, which is the secretariat of the regional integration movement.
And that's what you are the Director General of it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. A number of persons sent some questions and comments that they wanted to put to you. The civil society organizations are asking an outstanding question regarding selection process for the civil society representative on the Judicial and Legal Services Commission.
Yeah, no, I saw that question and I was curious about it because I even called the court to find out. The OECS Supreme Court there is a Judicial and Legal Services Commission, but its composition is set by its rules, and the OECS Commission does not have any say in that composition. So in the OECS Supreme Court, what you have let me see, it's 5 members of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. One is a representative of the sitting judges, another person who represents ex-judges on the court, and there are 2 representatives of the member states' public service commissions, and that membership is rotated among the member states. Right? I neglected to ask for how long, but it's rotated. And then the sitting Chief Justice is a chairperson of that body.
Okay.
Now, in the Caribbean Court of Justice, that's a different matter. The CCJ has likewise also has a Regional Judicial and Legal Services Commission, but this one comprises 11 members, including, like the OECS, the court president, legal, educational, and public sector institutions. So they would include representatives from the regional bar associations, the Secretary General of CARICOM, the Director General of the OECS, Deans of Law Faculties, and Chairman of the Council of Legal Education. There are also, now, that came out of the research I did based on the questionnaires, because I've never actually sat in the Regional Judicial and Legal Services Commission in the CCJ, and I've been Director General for 10 years. What I have been consulted on, however, are the nominations from civil society who would sit on the commission. And between CARICOM and ourselves, we are obligated to consult and jointly name 2 persons to sit as representatives of civil society. Now, one of the challenges for us in that, certainly in the last 5 years or so, has been identifying who really can be deemed to be legitimate representatives of civil society. Mm-hmm. So, we consult, and at one time there was a body in Barbados, I don't recall its name right now, but they were they were very vibrant in the civil society space, and they were purporting to be a grouping of civil society organizations. So we've tended to nominate somebody from that body. But I think that is going to be a challenge because, as you know, um, there are all kinds of organizations that spring up, and then people just claim to be. I can claim to represent a particular sector of interest, but the issue is what is the legitimacy of that claim? Um, that is a challenge we face in the OECS because one of the things we've been doing in terms of our ministerials, we started with ministers of agriculture that we when we first met in Antigua and Barbuda, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I don't know if you know the NIS building in St. Vincent is a circular room, right? The conference center. So the head table and proceedings are actually at the center of the room, and the observers are the outer rings. Minister Caesar invited farmers and representatives of farmers' organizations to attend not just the opening ceremony of that Council of Ministers of Agriculture, but to sit in throughout, except for the political caucus. Because our ministerials have a political caucus, which is closed to just ministers and myself. And then there's the wider grouping where development partners, persons wanting to present papers and so on, come to do so. So the farmers sat in that outer circle, and it was a fascinating experience because here were farmers from St. Vincent and the Grenadines observing their minister discussing and negotiating with other ministers on matters affecting agriculture. And that seeded the idea that, as a standing thing, we should ensure that whenever we have a minister's council, the key stakeholders in that portfolio should be invited to attend and not just attend the opening ceremony, but sit in at that. Now, in order to decide who has the legitimacy to sit in, we need to be clear that two people can't come forward and say, I'm a farmers association or I'm a national PTA. They should have be properly constituted legally and show evidence of financial rectitude, even if it's 5 cents you have in the bank. Now, once you do that, then we can recognize you as a legitimate representative of a sector, and you can come in and sit. So we've been practicing that. In education, for example, student councils, the teachers' unions, and the student councils in the countries are invited to sit in on the non-political parts of the Ministers of Education meeting. In agriculture, we have and in every sector, we have what we call strategic partners. These are people who are with us every step of the way in terms of our agenda in that subject matter. So in agriculture, for example, IECA and the FAO, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, are our strategic partners. They attend all meetings, they participate fully. Other groupings that may be associated with agriculture, like say the World Food Program, may come in from time to time. If they want to make a presentation to the ministers, they're welcome to do so. But standing membership is reserved for those who are actively engaged with us and who are on the same strategic trajectory as we are.
A number of the questions I received, I sent some to you, and I'm still seeing some coming in, relate to sports.
Mm-hmm.
Someone pointed out that the OECS, obtained several medals, in fact, 2 gold medals, 2 bronze in the last Olympics. And those were from citizens who actually represented the OECS, because the Antiguans can claim correctly so that Rai Benjamin is an Antiguan citizen. So one person was asking if there is any plans for an academy, the OECS Academy. I think you addressed that partially, but the question was asking the context of the difficulty of accessing a sports program in North America. And then someone is very interested in and has observed that there's no reference to the sports desks, which was very I think in the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah. Now, since when I came into OECS, that was one of the most frequently asked questions people ask me. When are you re-establishing a sports desk or culture desk and so on? My honest opinion is that the notion of a desk for sports and a desk for culture does not make sense. What we try to do instead is to help those sectors better organize themselves so we have bodies that are democratically elected with people who are technically competent in these areas to then, in a forum like the ministers that I just described to you, the ministers of sport, when we started it up, the first order of business was to design an ecosystem for sports development. And within that, we'll be creating some structures. So we've already written to member states, asking them to nominate persons of high sporting distinction or recognition to be members of a regional and OECS sporting council. And that body will be the one that will set overall policy for sports and so on. I think one of the things that is driving this issue about the urgent people insisting on setting up a desk at the OECS was because of the performance of Reds Pereira when he became the person in charge of sports at the OECS. I mean, Reds was literally a department by himself. And in fact, just for information, we continue to work closely with Reds. He's been giving a lot pro bono to the OECS, and a lot, we rely on him a lot for advice and so on. So Reds has played actually an integral part of the discussions on the formation of the Council of Ministers of Sport and so on. But what people don't realize, Reds Pereira mobilized all the resources necessary. It didn't cost the OECS a cent to run that sports program as it did under Reds Pereira. And his successor then also carried on some of that work. But over time, the level of productivity has dropped, and so I didn't feel that was the best approach.
Okay.
Equally in culture. So what we need to do now is to look at ways in which we can engage people in having strong national voices become part of a regional council that could do that. Grenada, for example, as you know, had a thing last year, or probably 2 years ago now, a big encounter on culture involving the diaspora,
Yes.
the orange economy. And I was invited to that. I gave a couple of feature presentations, and Grenada is really moving ahead on that. Now, in a case like that, any cultural initiative we have to undertake would be located in Grenada. So, for example, we were able to get Orlando to be sitting on the Afrexim Bank's commission on the orange economy, which, imagine, the bank initially had plans to actually invite a Jamaican Olympian, sports Olympian, to sit on that. I guess they were looking for name recognition and publicity appeal. And we said to them, no, if you're doing that, we want to insist that the OECS has a seat at that table, and that the country that has shown the most advanced work on cultural development and the orange economy, that person will come from there. So that's how he got on board.
And which bank is that?
Sorry?
Which bank is that?
If what?
Which bank it is?
Oh, the Afrexim Bank.
Okay.
The Afrexim Bank, that's a bank in the development bank in Africa that has been providing a lot of support to the region. So now that opens the door to a lot of opportunities that we've been discussing with Orlando. So, for example, when we look at the whole, first of all, let me say, when Prime Minister Motley started that initiative of a rapprochement between Africa and the Caribbean, remember, she was chair of CARICOM. Well, she was pushing it, given her vision. And Suriname was chair of CARICOM at the time. They invited the African, a huge delegation, I think it was about 500 people from Afrexim Bank and other institutions in Africa, to come to Barbados for that encounter. And in that meeting, the first agreement was signed for stronger relations between Africa and the Caribbean. 7 countries signed that agreement. 5 of these countries were 5 independent member states of the OECS. Barbados was the other because Prime Minister Motley was the steering author of this, and Suriname because they were president of the head of the CARICOM, the chair of the CARICOM heads at the time. No other CARICOM country signed at that early stage. So the point we've been making to the Africans is that we take unification with Africa seriously. The only country that didn't sign at the time was Grenada, and that was because you were in the middle of an election. So effectively, there was no government. As soon as the government changed, they signed on. So the OECS has been at the forefront of encouraging and pushing for links with Africa. And one of the challenges we face, we keep asking ourselves, how can we optimally benefit from relations with Africa? In agriculture, there's nothing we produce that Africa cannot produce bigger, better, faster, cheaper, on a scale that will be impossible for us to meet the needs of the African market. Well, the answer to that is for us to we've identified certain products that are unique to the OECS, arrowroot in St. Vincent, the spices and nutmeg in Grenada, the Antigua black pineapple, which is a unique genome of pineapple. Ensure that we have the genome rights to those things. Breadfruit, by the way, from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is original Captain Bligh genome. Ensure that we have UNESCO World Heritage Intangible status for these products. Now, if we take the pineapple example, the farmers in Antigua to form a government to form a joint venture company with traditional Antigua black pineapple farmers, propagate the stock, go to Africa. We need to find, because not everywhere in Antigua can you plant that pineapple. Find somewhere in Africa with the correct soil type that would be conducive to this, and buy or lease 500,000 acres of land to propagate that plant that pineapple in Africa. At that location, we can partner with an African entrepreneur to set up a processing plant, jams, jellies, preserves, the whole works, which is more value added. So without having to ship a single pineapple across the Atlantic, we can meet the huge demands in the African market in an economy that is based in Africa, but which belongs to us. Right? Now, think about that in terms of the other big area of opportunity is the creative economy. African festivals, Dominica Creole Festival. We've discussed with Dominica the idea of continuing to have an annual festival every year. And in fact, even before this partnership with Africa, the Dominicans started bringing in Afrobeat artists from Nigeria and other places. So continue to do that. But every second year, in addition to the Antigua, the Dominica edition, you have an edition in some part of, preferably starting with Francophonie Africa because of the Creole base. And you can then we can bring our artists across, our performers and so on, to Africa. So every 2 years, we have the Dominica, a branded Dominica Creole Festival in Africa. Now, here's an amazing statistic. Rihanna, the Bajan singer, is worth 1.4 billion. Her net worth is 1.4 billion US dollars. The total economy, the GDP of Barbados, is 3.9 billion US. So if Rihanna was a currency, 3.5 riris equal the whole economy of Barbados. And that's a single Bajan creative. Now, for Rihanna to reach where she reached, it was a long, painful journey. Her talent catapulted her, but you know how competitive that is in the West. For another Rihanna to emerge, going through the African population, where 2/3 of the population of Africa is under 21 years of age, right? Creates a huge opportunity for our artists to be as big as Rihanna, but much faster and easier because of racial, cultural affinities and the deep cultural links between resonances between Africa and the Caribbean. So there you have it. The creative economy is a huge
But
thing.
but but, but why do you think? I mean, I hear you speak to all of these things, but why do you think that is not happening, and why has it not happened? Because you
Um,
mentioned education earlier, and I'm not
uh,
sure if we are doing anything across the OECS on an educational level that brings and builds African consciousness. So the connectivity that you speak about
mhm.
may be, to the extent that we make that connectivity, it may be in a very commercial, materialistic sense and
Yeah.
has no organic link at all.
No, no, you're right about that, Joe. But the thing is, first of all, everything we do now at the OECS, we try to look at it from a systems perspective because people tend to look at things in silos, as you correctly point out. So the rapprochement, I'm just speaking from an economic perspective. What are the economic opportunities we see with Africa? But you're correct. A lot has to be done in terms of our historical understanding of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And all of that. So yes, that has to involve um, doing stuff with Africa and in the revisiting of West Indian history, right, with a more of an Afrocentric perspective. Because yes, we had the making of the West Indies, and we still learn about Columbus coming and so on. But with all the research that has been done in recent years, from Walter Rodney to Hilary Beckles, it is really crucial that we redesign our understanding of ourselves through the teaching of history. And I'm sure you would have heard Prime Minister Skerrit recently made a very strong statement talking about the need for all this. We subjectize in education too much. Everything is create a new subject. The fundamentals of education is what has to be revisited. And the pedagogy is where you can create these connections between subjects because knowledge is not a unilinear path. And you talking if you're talking nutrition, you also have to talk chemistry, you have to talk about biology, you have to talk about other aspects, agriculture. So all of these things is what creates a concept of nutrition. Health comes into that as well. So we are trying to take that ecosystemic approach. Um,
What is happening at the OECS level in regards to reparations? I know back in 2013, CARICOM made a big splash, and that has really helped to bring the reparation issue back into focus. But except for an
the,
occasional
the,
speech at the United Nations, I'm not getting a feeling
mm,
that there's a real effort to build that consciousness nationally and from an OECS wide
well,
standpoint on
no,
the
the
issue of
focus
reparation.
No, the focus in terms of reparations is, as I told you, the whole thing about the history and our understanding of history. A lot of work is being done now with especially different groups of teachers from across the OECS looking at curriculum development, reform, and so on. And as you know, there are several outstanding people at the regional level, like June Suma, yourself, Fats Dobry Nomad from Antigua, from the OECS, who are integral to the regional movement. Um, to be honest, we don't see it as something that is separate, that the OECS needs to separately engage on that. At the CARICOM level, there's sufficient clout and movement on that. Our efforts on that would be more in terms of the integration and the level of consciousness building so as to follow through on some of those things. Um, and actually, I had one, on a personal level, I had one point of disagreement when the reparations thing was first raised. I distinctly remember at the CARICOM meeting, I had a discussion with Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and they were talking about reparations from the UK and all of that. And I said to him, you know, a lot of research which is now being done needs to be done on that to provide an evidential basis. Although it was obvious historically what went on, but you needed to build a solid case. Because remember, what gave stimulus to the reparations thing was the victory of the Mau Mau people in bringing the British to court for the atrocities committed against the Mau Mau. And the same company that represented them legally were the ones that Sir Hilary initially had dialogue with on the approach to reparations. So I was in the early CARICOM meetings where that was discussed. And in fact, I remember at the time, Kamala Bissessar was Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And after Sir Hillary presented, she was like, well, Prime Minister, what about the indentured servant, the indentured Indians? And Hillary very fast on the draw said, well, um, we could look at it, but the fact is they were indentured, so there was a contractual arrangement, whereas in the case of the Africans, there was no contractual thing. But I say this because one of the points I raised with Sir Hillary was that to me, the easiest route to making that case for reparations should have been to go through Haiti. Because as you know, up to the 1950s, the early 60s, Haiti was still paying the debt that it had incurred from the loan it took from the Western financial institutions to pay for its own freedom. So that's not a thing about talking about reparations for the past. This is the past that is still in continuity today. And so
Well,
the legal
not only that, the money that was borrowed in 1833 to pay the enslavers, the 20 million pounds that the British borrowed,
yeah.
British government only finished paying that loan in 2015. So that's immediacy.
Yeah, but you see, the British government was paying its own people that money, so they paid their own people for the
Oh, I
slavery.
know, I know.
They didn't pay our ancestors. But here in this, what makes it different in the case of Haiti is the fact that Haiti liberated itself from the oppression of slavery, and then they were forced to pay their former slave owners for their own value that was lost to them. Right, so there's a very important nuance difference there, and that's why I felt that we should have gone vigorously in favor of Haiti to do this. Now I know there are complications in the Haitian case because the internal political dynamics of Haiti is another story. You know, the Creole bourgeoisie and their links to foreign capital and the exploitation of the Haitian masses still continues, but that's another story.
Let me ask. To what extent do you think there is among our people in the OECS consciousness, what I call OECS consciousness? Like we have Grenadian consciousness, Antiguans
Yeah,
are.
I
Yeah.
think we are beginning to see the emergence of a relatively solid grounding for that consciousness, um, coming through a number of things and in different ways. And we have to make sure that we every opportunity that presents itself, we capitalize on it. For the last 4 or 5 years, in the celebration of OECS anniversary, we go to a different island and we send a team to do school visits. And we increasingly too have been inviting people to encouraging at the education level that schools do visits to the different islands. One of the airlines that recently set up in the region for the first time came to us to just discuss their operations in the region. And I made it clear to them, well, obviously, in the face of commercial openness, we could not, as a commission, privilege anybody. But I said, I mean, I applaud the initiative of coming to talk to us so we can have a discussion because there are a lot of areas I see where airlines can play a very critical development role other than just flying people from island to island. And we shared some of these ideas with them. So I said to them, for example, if you island hopping, first of all, at this point in time, we have more airlines flying across the region than ever before. Yet it is more expensive and it is more difficult and inconvenient to get from point A to point B. So
Yeah.
that's a strange irony. And that is because the market, people are just using the opportunity to get as much as they could out of the market without looking rationally at how they can contribute best to efficiency in the market. So one of the suggestions I made to them is that listen, there's nothing preventing you as a commercial airline to offer a special rate during the August vacation period for students from OECS member states to go visit other OECS member states. And to make it more rational, we will be prepared to work with you. If you charter a flight, you provide a charter that starts in Grenada, picks up a full plane load of Grenadian students, drop them in St. Vincent, Load up with Vences, drop them in St. Lucia. Load up with Lucians, drop them in Martinique. And you go up the chain in that way. And then 2 weeks later, you do the reverse, pick up, drop up, drop back, right? I mean, that would be a fantastic thing. And you do so at the least possible cost. Because it's charter, it should be cheaper than already commercial flights. And you reduce the price further to make it affordable, right? I just saw a social media thing that came out. A St. Lucian teacher went to Guadeloupe primary school with her primary school class. And it was amazing, the video stuff she has on the social media about the kids, the excitement of being in Guadeloupe. So many of them traveling for the first time, the things that they see and so on. Among some of the work we're doing in the education unit now is about knowing your OECS. So actually developing a curriculum, not as a subject, remember, not as a new subject, but infusing in geography, the understanding of the geography of the other OECS countries, infuse it in history and understanding of the history of the thing, and getting students through the SBAs. And by the way, with the CPA, which is a redesigned common entrance, there is something like the SBA. Students can be charged with the responsibility. Go research, talk to old people in your village, and write the history of your village. And we publish it, you know.
But that SBA is misconceived, man. The parents are doing the SBAs.
Yeah, well, but that's because you see, we are treating examinations as a competition. It's all about grades and a number of things. It's not about learning. Now, again, that was one of the challenges when I was at CXC in terms of getting that message across, because unfortunately, in some ways, the ministries and governments are perpetuating that thing. Because when you want to, you know, I mean, countries like Ghana always have the boast. They have 15 students with 21 subjects.
21 ones.
All ones, you know. What does that do for anybody? It's about the quality of what you get. And then again, the ways in which I believe that the methodology we have in the CPA should be extended to the CSEC exam and the CAPE exams. Because in the CPA, for example, a teacher teaches a topic in the class. And right there, the students are challenged to respond either by way of a test or by way of an essay or something. They're given an exercise that shows the extent to which they've mastered the content that they've been taught. Now, children are at different rates. So, for example, in English, if you discuss what are the elements of a good essay with the class, they get the students to contribute. It's not the teacher writing on the blackboard. And read after me, students. The elements of a good essay are A, B, C, D. No, have a discussion on that and let them come out with their ideas, and then you shape that into what are the elements. Okay, having done that, let's choose a topic and write a 2-page essay on that topic. Every child gets up and reads his or her essay back to the class. The class critiques that essay based on what they discussed earlier as a good elements of a good essay. And then when they've done that, the teacher would say, okay, go back and rewrite your essay, taking into account the feedback that you've received. Now, after the second iteration, people may say, oh, Headache, your essay is good, so you're okay, you don't need to do further work on it. Now, Headache as a brighter student might tend to now be disruptive because as far as he's concerned, he's done already, his work done. He's idle in the class. But the methodology requires that the teacher say, okay, Headache, Didacus still has to do stuff on his essay, work with him to help him improve his essay. So using the brighter students to help the slower ones. And when we were at CXC, we did the psychometrics of that. It showed conclusively that the students learn faster from their peers than from the teachers. So all boats are rising. And Grenada is a perfect example of that, because the government of Grenada at the time decided, when we were doing the piloting of the CPA, that rather than give us pilot schools, they wanted every school to be part of this thing, right? Every school, roll it out across. I said to the minister, this is a dangerous thing, because politically we cannot afford this to become a political football. So the conditions under which I would agree to that is, one, to do a presentation to your entire cabinet. Franca Alexis Johnson was the minister then. And secondly, to do the same presentation to the opposition. So we have full agreement politically across the board.
On both sides.
We did the presentation to cabinet, we got full endorsement. When we met with Dr. Keith Mitchell at the time, who was in opposition, he brought about 30 odd people into the room, all his opposition side. And we presented. The presentation lasted over 4 hours. At the end of that, he said, I give you my word, we are not going to make any political thing. This is a good thing for the country. You have our blessing. And since then, you can check the figures. Grenada's performance in what used to be the conventions, the CPA, has moved double digits. Every 2 years. Now, when you see that happening, it means, because in common entrance, 1 year performance is good nationally, the next year the mean drops, it kind of seesaws up and down. But when you see a country is steadily improving its mean, and by leaps and bounds like that, it means all boats are rising at the same time. So that tells you that that methodology is what I think needs to be infused now in CXC at other levels. I remember in Grenada when we met with parents to discuss their experience of the CPA, because again, parental views are crucial in these things. A parent said to us that one evening at dinner, the youngest son who was doing the CPA and the older son who was doing CSEC, they were having a discussion about their homework and their plans and so on. And they asked the son doing his SBA how things was going. And he was describing the methodology he was using. And the younger brother telling him, no, you're doing it wrong. Because in the CPA, they had a more extensive discussion about methodology and approach to doing something like an SBA. Right? And I mean, it blew our minds to hear that story, but anecdotally, it tells you that this is the right way to go. So learning has to be more engaging, and it's about the pedagogy. It's not about subjects, and exams are only meant to be indicators of progress and not the be and end all. Certification is just an attestation of what you've accomplished.
So we need a complete overturn conceptually of what we should be doing. You know,
and I'm telling you, Joe, it is happening in the OECS, so stay tuned. One early notice, and we need your support, everybody's support in pushing that. In September, the coming school year in September, we are going to be doing not a survey, but a census of every student and every teacher in the education system, from early childhood up to primary and possibly tertiary, but we're saying from infant to secondary. And the simple questions, but basically, what's wrong with education from your perspective as a student, what you like and dislike, and what are the ideas, what are the things that would make learning exciting for you, and what would you like to see happen in your schools? Not just about the textbooks, what should school be like for you? Now, because it's not a sample, it's a census. So on a given day, the ministers have agreed to that across the OECS. That day will be the census day for education, student and teacher views on education. And we are going to codify all of this together so that at the national level, your Minister of Education will see what the whole country is saying in an aggregate about changes in education. That can be broken down to a parish level. It can be broken down to a school level, so a principal can see what they're saying. Now, we're going to be using the same AI engine that was developed by our young people for the digital learning ecosystem to do that amalgamation and cross-fertilization of ideas. You know the power of that. You know the power of that to determine an education transformation agenda. Everybody will be on board.
Yep, great idea. Any thought has ever been given to using the technology to link schools across the region?
Yes.
So for example, as Form 3 presentation college on a particular day, through using the technology, could actually be in the same space with Form 3 ins, Pastor St. Lucia, St. Vincent as the case may be.
Yeah, that idea has been raised, but it will come after we have people
The
have
census.
received a degree of, no, not beyond the census. When people have a degree of comfort with the digital learning ecosystem, that will be very easy to do.
Okay, good.
It's a great idea because, as I told you, one of the things we're doing now is a whole know your OECS, a whole matrix for knowing your OECS. Students either on physical tour or even in school, you're doing geography or social studies, whatever the subject. There are ways in which ask questions, get to know about other places in the OECS, get have students corresponding. If we do the school visits, for example, encourage them to go on tours. They they can have corresponding counterparts in the
Yeah.
other islands and write them. English students writing French students. I mean, guys, people think this thing requires a lot of money. Money is not the problem. It's imagination that's our problem. Because without imagination, everything you come up with will cost you a ton of money. With imagination, you can do amazing things. When I was
Yes.
PS education in St. Lucia,
Imagination and implementation.
yes, yes. When I was PS education in St. Lucia, we tried to boost the learning of French at the primary school level. And one of the things we did was suggest the school exchanges and everything. But then Express Days Ile had just started running between St. Lucia, Dominica, Martinique, Guadeloupe. We made contact through Alliance Francais to say the previous day's newspapers in Martinique, which would be thrown away. Can you send us a load of that on Express Days Ile every day it comes down? We had our own internal courier service. Each school had two mail bags. One was at the ministry, one was at the school. So we had a vehicle going in one direction, a vehicle in another direction. They would go drop the bag with mail from the ministry, pick up the bag with mail for the ministry. Right? Using that system, every school got a pile of newspapers from Martinique for the previous day as reading material for their French classes. Now, what did that do? They learning the news in Martinique. They learning about social, you name it, quizzes, comics in Martinique in the newspapers. It just made French come alive, and that didn't cost us a cent.
Someone has a comment here I just want to draw your attention to. It says our education system is designed to train students to pass exams, not to produce citizens who can think critically and develop in them the ability to find solutions to our problems that hinder national development. That's our observation, Emil.
It's a very correct observation, and that's exactly what we're trying to change with the transformation efforts we're doing. And again, let me remind you, it's not a question of more money, it's just a question of imagination. Let me give you one example. We had a USAID project to improve reading at the lower grades of primary. It was a very successful project. Professor Errol Miller of Jamaica was involved with us on pushing that project. We completed the project ahead of time on the budget. It was about something like, I think 50 or 75,000 US left over. And USAID at the time said, do you all have anything you all can do with that money rather than just send it back to us? So we had the idea of, okay, so students, it was clear from all of the tests done that students had improved their reading capacity. So we say, okay, having become better readers, why don't we challenge them to be better writers? So we started a thing of encouraging students to write their own little books, storybooks, right? Little novelettes. And the best of these books we publish as a student written novel with the student's name and so on and picture as the author on a global platform that is designed to hold books written by students, right? Which we had access to. So imagine the pride of your son, Headache, seeing
How long ago that
a book he
was?
writes. Huh?
How long ago
That was about 3 or 4 years ago we did this.
Oh, because I was just going to ask you.
That platform is going to be part of the digital learning ecosystem because these books are already out there in digital form. And we've been encouraging students to go see what their peers have written. Read it and see for yourself. You too can be a writer.
I was going to ask you if you have followed any of those students in terms of their adult life, but I guess that was
No, we
something
haven't.
that
We haven't. We haven't. But when I was at CXC, one of the exam questions in the English language test was to give what we call a stimulus question. So it said, I walked into the room and I could not believe my eyes. And you had to continue the story, right? So off the top of your head. We selected, and you can find that book on Amazon. We selected, I think, about the 25 or 30 top. Every year you have a top award for the best essay like that, right? So the students who over the last 20 or 30 years had received those awards, we tracked them. We went back to them, found out where they were. So in the book, if you get a copy, it's on Amazon, as I said. You can look for CXC. I'll WhatsApp you the name. I don't recall, but if you look on the Amazon for CXC, you should see it. We have a picture of them then at that age when they were writing it. Their picture then, their picture now. Then they had to answer a few questions. When you read that stimulus question, tell us what went through your head that led you to, what was the process that led you to produce that award-winning essay, right? And then the other thing was, how has that award impacted your life? You know, many of these students are now in careers having to do with writing in journalism or whatever. Some of them are authors.
That's what I wanted to find out, yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the economics of the OECS. I know we spoke about freedom of movement. What's about the freedom to be employed, to work in other members?
Well, that's part of the freedoms, right? The free movement of people involves not just is to live, work, play, invest, do everything as if you were normal or regular. You were born in that country. The missing piece there that came to the assembly this last week was what we call contingent rights. So if you're married to, let's say, a Jamaican and they come into the OECS, they would enjoy contingent rights, you know. And also there were things that had to be ironed out. So for example, one country, attendance at the community college was free. You there?
Mm-hmm. There.
Are you all hearing me?
I mean,
yes, we hear you.
Yeah. So in one member state at the time, nationals didn't have to pay to go to the community college, but foreigners had to pay. So once you're not from the country, you had to pay. So we now had to put in work that iron that out. That if you are from an OECS member state, you shouldn't be paying because whatever exists for the nationals should exist for you. Now, we had to also rationalize that across the other OECS member states because people couldn't be, otherwise everybody would come to that country to get free tertiary level education.
Do you still have an issue with the landholding though? The ability for
the landholding, there's some issues. Yeah, there's still some issues that need to be ironed out in terms of the landholding. And again, you see, what we have to appreciate is that some of these issues are not so much technical issues as political issues. Because, you know, if I'm trying to get land as a solution here, and then you tell me that somebody else from another OECS country can more easily access land than I can, it creates a big problem for the government. So we just have to ensure that there's consistency.
Is it more easily or equally?
Yeah, equally and easily.
Why more easily? Which part will be more easily?
What you mean?
Look, you said somebody from, let's say, Grenada goes to St. Lucia, they can more easily obtain land.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was equally.
No. They should equally obtain land. But I'm saying if the differential in policy is such that they can get it, that somebody can get it easier than me. Okay, if for me as a St. Lucian, it appears that a Grenadian or a Dominican can come in here and get land that I would like to get easier than I get it, then it becomes a political problem.
That's the part I was asking. What will make it more easier or easier?
Oh, what would make it
Because
easier?
they have access to money and so?
Yeah. No, well, what would make it easier is we have to make sure that the conditions are equal. So, okay, if it's a question of financing, then we should have access to financing to make it happen. Obviously, if I do graduate, I can't expect to buy land that is $100 a square foot as a St. Lucian if I can't afford it and dig horrors because a Grenadian who can afford $100 buys it. So that would be unreasonable, right? Yeah, no, it's just that a level playing field and an equal level playing.
Yes, I understand that. Jubu, you have a question?
The question I had for you, Dr. Jules, is on the issue of telecommunications. We know, I think each of these societies have a National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. And I think the OECS also has a regulatory commission, right, in St. Lucia. But are we getting the bang for the buck based on the kind of monies we pay to these telephone companies, Flow and Digicel? And I mean, we're seeing some of the problems right here tonight. What is happening at the OECS level to really correct this? Because in St. Vincent, for example, the NTRC regulation says that if I'm having bad service, I can sue the telephone company. I have to make numerous complaints to the NTRC, and then the NTRC does what they want to do before I can get a chance to sue. Why was that organized in such a way? Because it really protects the telecommunication companies.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I'm not able to answer that question because all of that is in the domain of ECTEL, the Eastern Caribbean Telecoms Authority. So they would have their explanations. At a broader policy level, I can tell you that we have been deeply concerned about that because a lot of the stuff we are doing now, especially involving digital learning and everything, requires that we move faster in that space to make it cheaper, easier, more affordable, and more bandwidth is required. I was invited to, as you know, Flow just rebranded itself as Liberty Communications. I did have a spell in my career where I worked as head of HR for the Eastern Caribbean for cable and wireless then. So I have some knowledge and links of how the industry operates. And at that meeting in Florida where they did the rebranding, I was invited to give some remarks. And I raised the issue about the need for ubiquitous bandwidth across the region, the removal of roaming between the islands, right? And the fact that we really do have to come on board with the power of the digital realm. But I saw recently a statement sometime last year, Dennis O'Brien of Digicel saying that no business case can be made for 5G in the Caribbean, right? Now, countries are already, a lot of, like China, for example, is talking 6G. And if we still stuck at these lower levels of bandwidth and access, does that say that we're going to be left in the kitchen to deal with the scraps?
But do we need 5G now, or we need efficiency? Because it seems as though we are very inefficient in what's happening now. So if we get a more efficient service,
we need both. We need both. But again, you see the way that technology works. There's a close correlation between the two. You can't get higher technology on the basis of the old efficiencies. So you must upgrade your platforms, your operating procedures, your standards in order to be able to run that new technology. So we really do need both. And I'm saying that, we can't wait. there again we get caught in geopolitics there, because the Europeans have been putting pressure on us to influence the Caribbean Telecoms Union about not using Huawei equipment, which is Chinese. And I'm saying, well, the point of the matter is we cannot say to CTO, do not buy Chinese equipment. We should be looking at what is the best deal that we can get from any provider of the most advanced technology that we can access. And if you want us to stick with the European equipment, then make an offer that is better, on the same technological level or better, and better pricing than what we can get elsewhere. That's how it works. Your geopolitics is not our problem. But again, you see, these things there are a lot of interconnections in these things, because then the hidden threat would be that, security gaps in there. There are security gaps in there, and that if you're using the SWIFT system for financial transfers, that's always the excuse put forward, that you using Chinese equipment, you create a vulnerability hole for the Western financial system.
Any and I'm asking a question that Jobo may be interested in also. In terms of the judicial system, a single entry for legal practitioners. As it stands now, you have a ridiculous situation. If for example, the Court of Appeal is sitting on a case out of Grenada, but they decide they will hear the matter in St. Lucia, a St. Lucian lawyer who's not called to the bar in Grenada cannot appear.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, there has been some discussion of that, not specifically in relation to the legal profession, but in terms of professional accreditation.
General.
Yeah, generally. And in principle, there's the agreement that we need to do something about that. There has to be some sort of standards, but the onus there would be on whatever the governing bodies in the profession, the professional associations, to advance views on how that can be done. So whether you're a lawyer or an engineer or a dentist, once you're accredited in one OECS member state, then you should be accredited across all of them. Now, that would require some discussion between the national authorities, but also importantly about whatever the current accreditation bodies for that, so that they can arrive and shape that new system.
Yeah, because
Again, now that's what you raised in there. For some people might look like not such a crucial point, but it is absolutely an absolutely critical thing, because it means at the professional levels, at the higher professional levels, it's going to do a lot for our international competitiveness. Because imagine, it's one thing to be a lawyer in, say, just to be facetious, in Rat Island in St. Lucia, to be a lawyer there, versus being a lawyer in that can practice across the whole OECS. Because then it gives you a stronger case to say, I want to practice across CARICOM, and then I can even practice internationally. And the irony of this is that if you look at the history of professions in the region, we have had some outstanding, in the legal area, some outstanding jurists who have made their name globally. The Chief Justice of Nigeria for years was Sir Danley Alexander, a St. Lucian guy from Sufre. Telford Georges from Grenada was Chief Justice of Tanzania. You just name
it. I think he's Dominican. Telford George. I think Telford George is a Dominican.
Yeah, Dominica.
I said Grenada.
No, Dominica.
Yes, he was already outstanding.
And then you had Dennis Byron, who also became the head of the
Kids, the CCJ, and was in the UN system.
And Adrian Saunders recently, of recent times.
Right. I want to ask you about foreign policy from an OECS stand. Well, not so much, I wouldn't ask foreign policy. I want to ask you, do you think that they are entrenched fiefdoms in the Caribbean, in the OECS, in terms of individual states, which seriously hinders any serious movement to the total and complete integration and harmonization of the OECS and to a large extent the CARICOM. Because there was a project, I'm sure you're aware of, the West Indies Federation, started in 1958, it lasted 4 years. And one would have thought that when we did the Treaty of Chaguaramas, we did the Treaty of Basseterre, that this would be going, we were hoping to get to that point where we would have complete harmonization, complete unity.
Yeah. Okay, Joe,
just to round off the question, did the Independence Project, the Individualized Independence Project, fundamentally alter our movement to, or the attainment of that kind of unity which we really need?
Yeah. Actually, the latter part of your question was where I was going to go first, because you see, people tend to just lament the demise of the West Indies Federation. But if you look at it carefully, the West Indies Federation, while it, for us who believe in regional unity, was a good step forward, the political reality of the Federation was that it was a British post-colonial project, right? And carrying that DNA, it was never really meant to unite the Caribbean in the way that we are talking about uniting the Caribbean. What this project was all about was greater efficiencies for the British state in the administration of this string of little islands, right? And in many ways, even after the breakup of the Federation, the way in which our independence was engineered and constructed still leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the autonomy that we think that we have and the sovereignty we believe we have. I was recently advised by a judge that theoretically our independence could be rescinded by an act of the British Parliament, since it was granted by an act of Parliament. Are you aware of that?
Order in council, it's arrow.
It's what, sorry?
It's basically an order in council. You see how you have regulations?
Yeah.
And the constitutions are schedules to those orders.
Yeah. So the decolonization project.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah, the decolonization project has never been fully realized. And I mean, credit to our forefathers who led us to independence, who fought the anti-colonial battle, the CLR Jameses and all of them, and the Barrows and the Comptons and so on. But the reality is that there's a lot of work still to be done if we're talking about sovereignty in a real sense.
Plenty work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though even our current day politics carries some of that DNA, because it suits external interests to have our domestic politics as fractious as they could see it. That prevents national unity on some questions.
Yeah. Okay. We only have about a few more minutes. So I just want to recognize the sponsors of the program again at this juncture. Gel Professional Solutions, Gem FM carried the program on FM out of Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAL.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Yes. Juma, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before. I think you had a follow-up question. That's what I was picking up.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave the foreign policy question alone. Just to make a comment, I went back to this text recently. I'm not sure if you are familiar with it. It's George Lamin,
Sovereignty of the imagination.
Sovereignty
Yeah,
of the
I haven't
Imagination.
seen that. I haven't seen that.
It's a brilliant piece of work that I really recommend that all of the people who are
Who
in
published
state
it?
administration.
Who
Excuse me?
published? Who was the publisher?
Um, Nahisi publishers out of St. Martin.
Oh, okay. What's it called? The Sovereignty of the Imagination.
Sovereignty of Imagination by George Lamin. It's a
Oh, my
speech he
God.
did.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but it's the
Right.
the
I mean, the title alone is usually attractive because I've always maintained that. Well, you heard me say it earlier tonight. What the issue is not money; it's imagination. I keep saying
yes,
that's
you did.
a problem because if you really want to achieve something, you do start by looking at the factors that prevent you from doing it. You look at the opportunities that are presented. And
Yeah.
I've often said to the team at the OECS that, we can see things as problems or we can see them as opportunities. Because a problem thoroughly analyzed gives you an opportunity to put in place a solution that would take you somewhere you never would have gone, or at least as further than you would ever have gone had that problem not occurred in the first place. So,
Yep. Do you want to also comment?
Yeah. Just to recommend this piece. It's really. I mean, I read it sometime before, and this happened to bounce into it again, and read it over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, and it really brings back some. The gentleman who did the forward to it. He said, he did the cricket analogy. He says when George Lamin did the presentation, it was a case of not a man move. The cricketing analogy, you stroke the ball and nobody moves.
Not a man move, yes.
Not a man move.
So, Didacus, we really want to thank you for coming on tonight. I mean, this was a real fascinating discussion. I mean, I slight difference. I agree. Imagination, vision, but I think also there need to be a commitment to change and to implement the vision and the imagination that we come up with. So I agree with you at that part, but I really think there's a deficit in terms of implementation.
well, I have a take on that because if you're serious about the sovereignty of the imagination, to quote Joe, if you're serious about the sovereignty,
That's not me. That's it. That's
I know,
Lamin.
but you championing it now. So I'm saying, if you're serious about that, then the question of commitment should be a given, because otherwise you just BSing. You can't champion something that is imaginative and at the same time not be committed to making it happen. Otherwise, you're just daydreaming. You know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
But isn't that the point? Isn't that the point? That Ramphal made when he did. What was the piece? The time for something. He says there's no shortage of studies in the Caribbean. What we don't do is implement.
yeah, I mean
A time for action. A time for
yeah,
action was the name of it.
there's an implementation deficit. But you see, I believe too, the implementation deficit arises because we behave like robots. So people get consultants to do a study of some problem, say in the region. Let's say regional transportation, and then the consultant comes and they write a report, and then it's read, it's put on a shelf. There was not really a commitment to this thing. And again, it's how we proceed to do the work that we do. So at several points in this conversation, I kept pointing to indirectly to the importance of the relevant constituencies being part of the conversation and being part of the solution to the problem. Because left to just technocrats, if I define a solution to a problem, I define the solution. Am I committed to implementing it? I should have that commitment if I defined it, but it doesn't always happen. Now, if you engage those who are most affected, as Mali say, who feels it, knows it, then you kind of bottleneck into making sure that you implement it. And more importantly, the engagement of these people is critical in shaping solutions that can make a difference and are workable.
Okay, so
I had a direct experience of that as PS education. When we did the first education sector plan, first of all, the British were going to give us a group of consultants to do it. So they were going to fly in and do it. Say, no, we will do our own analysis of the state of things and have some internal discussion. And then the British experts would come in as international expertise, lending an international perspective to it. One of the critical things when we had the first draft of the thing was to do town hall meetings in villages all around St. Lucia. And because of the Creole thing, I said to the team, we have to speak in Creole. And that was some people were really objecting to that. Like, I mean, these are high education concepts. We talk about educational change and so on. So why you want to speak in Creole, And in any case, why do we, if a parent is illiterate, what does it matter to them? I'm like, listen, no matter how educated or uneducated you are, every parent has aspirations for their child. And in their own way, they can articulate that. And that was one of the most humbling experiences I experienced in my life, because I speak Creole, but imperfectly. And to have to take education concepts and explain it in Creole to a farmer who may be semi-literate or a worker in a hotel is a different story. So you were the one singing and feeling stupid, while they were explaining the reality of what they experienced.
What they do every day. Okay, so Didacus, thank you so much again. Jumo, thank you very much. And
no problem, man. Anytime.
This was fascinating. Thank you very much. And until next week, thank you to all the viewers. Thank you to all those who will be watching the program. And until next week, thank you so much.
All the best.
All right, goodbye.
Okay,
all right, Julius, guys, good to see you again, man.
Yeah, same here. All right, take care.